Hello, everyone. Today we are talking about an epic emotion, one that was mentioned twice in the Ten Commandments, one that forms the bedrock of Nietzsche's theory and Ayn Rand's, one that I felt very intensely after The Bachelor. This is envy. So, following up after jealousy, we are now looking at the green beast. So, envy is a social emotion focused on problematic comparisons with others, where the self is viewed as performing poorly compared to a specific individual. We see envy in all sorts of places. So this can be between professional colleagues, siblings, and friends. It can also be between romantic partners. We talked last week about how envy and jealousy are often confused. But when we're talking about envy, this is best described as competition within a hierarchy perceived by the individual as important, whereas jealousy is always about three people. So jealousy involves the perception that a valued relationship is threatened by a third party. Those definitions came from a paper by Robert Leahy in 2021. So, Kibby, tell us about why envy is a problem, or when it becomes a problem.
I just don't know. It's a problem for me. I mean, you and I remember when we did the jealousy episode, you and I talked about how we don't feel that jealous. And then we were like, yeah, we definitely feel more envy. And then I thought, what is that? what, if I feel it all the time and it's a problem, what actually is it? So, yeah, I mean, envy, like any other emotion, and we could talk about whether this is emotion at all, just because there's actually no facial expressions tied to it. So I was thinking, like, is it an emotion? But it's like an emotion that kind of arises from feeling less than peers that you feel like you actually can compete with, right? Like, I don't feel envious for, I don't know, Kim Kardashian, because my whole world is so different from hers. So it's like, yeah. I do feel envious with people who are in like my running, right? Other academics, other people like me, other people who have or are going for the same goals as I do, right? And you know, with any kind of emotion, it's helpful in some ways, right? It helps us be ambitious. It helps us try to get power and resources for our family, for our group, right? But I think when I was doing some reading about it, what really is the problem is that it attaches sometimes to anger, right? And aggression, and even depression and anxiety. So if it's functional, you know, it motivates you to do better, to try harder. And just reading about it, there's like two different kinds of envy. There's the hope for success, which is like an aspirational one, which sounds pretty good, like something that you are hoping for success by seeing other people and comparing yourself. But there's also a malicious envy that's related to fear of failure, so it's like an avoidant motive. So you know, it has like two sides of a coin, and it's really when it's attached to aggression that's the problem, because then you have urges to destroy someone else's successes, undermine someone, or the opposite. It's kind of like this depression and anxiety because you're not good enough and you feel like you're a failure because you don't have what other people have. So yeah, like all the other emotions talk about could be good or bad.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing because I do think that last part is important as well. I mean, I remember coming off The Bachelor and I had 50,000 followers or something and all these cool experiences, and my friends were like, wow, it's so amazing, but all I could see was I don't have what Kendall has, for instance. And so it was kind of a denial of my own of my own position and an inability to be appreciative of it, which really that is a loss. That takes a lot from you. And so even if there's no hostile intent, I mean, it's not like I wanted any of them to be murdered, or hurt in some way. It was still like kind of just a denial of my own position.
Yeah, and I think I was reading that it has a huge role in narcissistic personality disorder, right? Like, it's actually one of the criteria for NPD, that do you find yourself envious of others or think that people are envious of you? Yeah. So if, it really is embedded in the kind of constantly comparing yourself to other people, and could be healthy, but it could flip in these different ways, right? Like, if you're like, obsessed with the idea that you have to be better than others in order to be good. I mean, you're like a benign kind of, well, you're more like the depressive version where it's like you feel sad about it. But yeah, there's some people out there with like, you know, NPD who put down other people, deny other people's achievements, like exploit others out of envy. So
it is interesting though. In that paper, the paper found that it's very attached to vulnerable narcissism, but that it actually was not found to correlate with grandiose narcissism. So there was a recommendation to possibly reconsider the role of envy in grandiose narcissism, which is what we normally think of when we talk about NPD. Yeah,
I was actually shocked by that too. I mean, for people who haven't heard our NPD episode, which you should, it's actually pretty good, if we don't say so ourselves. But people who are, like, narcissism has the two, I mean, it is fixated on social comparisons. I need to be better than people. But it flips, people with NPD flip between grandiose, I'm the best, I'm amazing, everyone loves me, blah, 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 to the vulnerable, which is, like, depressed and insecure and I think I'm the best, but no one recognizes me kind of thing. Yeah. And that paper was talking about, this other paper we're reading, talks about how you think that people who are grandiose experience envy. Like, if you think of any kind of, like, celebrities or political previous presidents, I don't want to go too political, but you could see that some people, get really mad when other people have power. But they said that the people who are grandiose tend to really just ignore other people's achievements. Okay. And they feel more hatred. So they don't feel that, they're not aware of the envy. They're not aware of like, oh no, I feel worse than other people. They just like, I hate other people who have what I want. And people who are more like insecure are the ones who go like, other people have what I want. And they can kind of like be aware of the emotion. Both sad situations, but that was why.
Yeah. So unfortunately, we don't have any good news for you grandiose narcissists out there. It just goes from bad to worse.
Yeah, it's funny hearing about, or just like, learning a little bit more about envy. And I do think that I am really driven by envy in ways that it's kind of, envy is kind of embarrassing to admit, right? Because it I don't know, it feels vulnerable even saying this right now, but I think that a lot of my achievements, or a lot of my drive has been like the adaptive form of envy, where I'm around people I respect, I'm around people I really like. Oh, I see someone else is like achieving like a grant or something like that in academia, or they've got these many papers, and I go, oh, I wish I had that. Like I have that moment of feeling bad about myself, and then actually that makes me go ahead and do it, and actually do those things. And I think part of it is like, when it's working well for me, it's like, oh, I didn't realize that that's something that I can go for. It kind of highlights what goals I can have and what I can achieve if other people have. Yeah. So it does have that moment of feeling bad about myself that drives me to work harder. At the same time, I also know that it can be really destructive. Like, sometimes when I just sit around thinking about how much, like, white men have kind of like this, I don't know, but what I perceive as an easier time sometimes in academia, it's, I think about it to the point where I don't even work harder. It demotivates me and just makes me feel terrible about myself and makes me, like, shake my fist at how unfair things are. I don't know if that's inaccurate, but it definitely isn't helpful for me. So. Right.
Well, I mean, I think one problem can be if you are envious of a person and you see a huge kind of gulf between like where you are and where they are, that just feels unconquerable in a sense.
Yeah.
And that's demotivating.
Yeah. It's interesting too because I was looking at the different kinds of people who tend to feel. I mean, even just in like this situation we're talking about is ripe for envy, right? It's like people who are more likely to experience envy. It's like I'm more likely to, extrapolating from the research, I'm more likely to envy someone who I value, who I like respect and admire. I believe it's possible that I might achieve their goals. And also sometimes if I perceive that person is undeserving, or and also I value status and recognition. Those are all the variables that research just found makes you more likely to envy someone. It's like, do you value that person? Do you believe it's possible to achieve their goals? Do you see the other person as undeserving? And do you value this kind of recognition or status? Academia just like really breeds that. Really read that at the time. I'm sure The Bachelor did too. In maybe a time that you didn't even like have that much envy, but
Yeah, I mean, The Bachelor is interesting because it's naturally hierarchical, and so, and that is a huge breeding ground for envy, because you know your place on the ladder, basically. You know how many rungs there are between you and the next person, the girl who, went home later than you, for instance. Yeah, and then you have Instagram, giving you follower counts and engagement metrics and stuff, and so you just see constantly this very, very direct social comparison, and it's hard. And then one of the reasons for envy, one of the reasons it's so legitimate. I mean, we're not just these envious monsters who just feel this way because we're shitty people. It's because people we're envious of typically they get more resources. And so, if we're envious of somebody who's very wealthy, well, there's good reason for that. Wealthy people they have greater access to experiences, opportunities, material goods. And then that was very clear on The Bachelor, because the more followers you have, the more media attention you get. The more media attention you get, the more cool opportunities you get. The more, your podcast can make money and actually reach people. And you can foster change in the world. And I mean, that's worth wanting. So it's really in your face. And the undeserving part is kind of funny because the fame gleaned from The Bachelor is kind of naturally undeserved. I mean, it's not like it's from a talent, I was thinking about that when Pauly D was our he was our DJ at one of the days of my bachelorette party, and he's
by the way, we all
just
came from Jacqueline's bachelorette party in Vegas, where I'm like 7 months pregnant. So, Pauly D was a DJ at some party that
Yeah, he did like an absolutely terrible job, but he was doing it just because he went on a reality TV show and acted like a dumbass for a few seasons, And so that I think again, like you're going to be envious of that, and it might bring up the hostile envy too, because you're just like, they don't even deserve this.
What kind of opportunities do you get? Like, let's say you have 100,000 followers versus like 50. What is the difference for you guys?
You make more money from ads.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I can put like an exact number to it. It's just I would watch certain people. There's a lot of media events where a lot of Bachelor people get together, and then they make more friends, and then they get more exposure, and then their engagement goes up. And these events can be very fun. I didn't really go to very many of them, but they looked fun. You get to go to premieres. You're asked on more Bachelor shows, which gets you more fame. So it's just kind of like a tumbleweed that kind of keeps going and picking up more and more.
Yeah. That's interesting. That's funny. Did you ever feel that one of the bad sides of envy is Schadenfreude, that German word for when you take pleasure in hearing problems in other people that you envy? Do you ever feel that way? Or?
All the time. Yeah. That's my hostile form. I'm not wishing people ill, but if something happens, then part of me is like kind of pleased about it. I mean, there's one person, I actually genuinely really dislike her, though, in Bachelor Nation. And one of my hobbies is to read the negative reviews on her podcast. I know that's so embarrassing to admit,
that.
But
ooh, that's juicy.
That's partially because I feel like I've been treated poorly by her. So I'm not entirely sure whether it's envy, but I am like pissed that she has so much success with this podcast. So, there's that.
Sense. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting as you talk about it because academia, the place that I've felt the most envy is in another hierarchy, like really specific
Yeah.
small bubble where there's a hierarchy and really quantifiable hierarchy. Like people put their CVs online,
Uh-huh.
you see the number of publications, you see the prestige of the places, you see like a number of grants they get. So it is funny how like I don't know. It just maybe there's like a systematic breeding of envy, right? If just like
Yeah.
putting numbers to people and their value and getting into that mindset, right? I know that other industries have like salaries as and you know how much money you made as like the quantifiable amount. So it's just interesting too how like to look at the different hierarchies and the different spaces that breed envy.
Yeah, and you're going to be more envious when you're as similar as possible to the envied person, except in this one domain where you differ. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, the closer your career is to other people's, like that's where that envy is going to be bred. I don't know if I have a further point there.
Yeah, no, it that's kind of how I feel about Kim Kardashian. Every time
Yeah.
we're around your bachelor friends, like I don't have any of that, right? I don't feel
Yeah.
envious. I mean, I'm not even in the playing field in that
Yeah.
world, so that's not
wonder
even
if-
something I compete in. Mm-hmm.
I wonder if social media can increase envy in part because, like, you know, in the 90s, the celebrities would just be these faces on tabloids and in the movies. Mm-hmm. But now it's like you get a look into their lives and how, I don't know, they've got pets and there's just like a lot more normality there. And so it brings you to closer in a
Yeah.
sense, like more similar.
Yeah, and I also was reading about how one aspect that really leads to a lot of envy is the idea that there's like an idealized life and there's really specific metrics of status, right? And when you're in social media, we could kind of all have a similar one, like how many vacations have you gone on? You're taking pictures of yourself in these sexy bikinis and, you know, at the beach and stuff like that. So there's like this subtle kind of like signs of status that can be displayed and like followers and likes and all that stuff. And it really, the interesting part about when envy is bred in certain scenarios, it's like a very specific, idealized, and like almost one-dimensional view of status. Like how many likes do you have is the ultimate thing, whereas in real life there's like a million ways that someone could be happy or successful, right?
Yeah.
And social media definitely like preys upon that. And can you imagine what that's like as a teenager now? I mean, watching my siblings become adolescents with, you know, Facebook or something, like we already had envy as like 12-year-old, 13-year-old girls. Like, can you imagine if that's quantified? Horrible.
Yeah. I mean, I probably would have had, like 100. I guess we see this with Facebook friends. I actually remember one of the things that I did when I was in high school. I was really in love with a much older man he was very minimalist when it came to Facebook, so he would like really, really limit the number of friends. And so I would really, really limit the number of friends. So if I saw other people with higher friend counts, that wouldn't matter. But I feel like that's not something that happens on Instagram, because on Instagram you get followers, not friends. And so, and that's not something you really, minimize. Or minimize.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, so that is just right there. That's a change from our high school days. You just see like, oh, this person has this many people that want to follow their lives.
Right. It's just such a sign of power, right? It's not a sign of like connection or love or any other kind of like non-competitive equality. It's just like pure like how many legions of people do you have?
Yeah, I mean, Facebook also used to be a place where you used it for connection, and Instagram isn't. Instagram is a place where you show off. You show yourself, and then you know how many people are enjoying watching you, which is just very different.
Yeah, and, even thinking about this as like in a mental health way, there's a couple types of people who tend to feel a lot of envy, which I think is interesting. One is the special person. Like, these are the different schemas, they, different types of people. So, like, one is called the special person, someone who thinks, like, I need to be viewed as special, superior, or admired by others, right? If someone believes that about themselves. Narcissist, right? The second one is defective, which is, like, other people's success proves how you're, like, worse off or inadequate or inferior. And the other is conscientious and responsible. I work so hard, but they get the reward, so that means I'm either, like, lazy or this isn't fair.
Is that one you?
Yeah, I guess that one is you. And then the conscious responsible one is definitely me. You might be the defective one, or the defective / incompetent. Like, I'm weak, I'm not as good, and these other people are signs that I'm not as good at something. That's what I see. When I see you feeling envious, that's what I see you do.
Yeah, I mean, certainly that's it at work. And maybe another... Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think I've got a little bit of the first flavor, too, the special flavor.
In what way,
I'm supposed to be special.
I guess they overlap, because I feel like I in terms of, well, I think I'm special because I work as hard as I did. Interesting. Yeah, I think I'm the conscientious responsible. I work so hard, other people had the rewards, and they didn't do anything. Or that means that I'm lazy and I didn't do enough, and then I just collapse into nothing and I watch a bunch of Netflix. So, really working with envy here.
We've just gone through a day in the life of Kimby.
This is how we experience envy, everyone.
Envy and guilt just cycling until she collapses in a heap in front of Netflix.
Yeah, watch a lot of Netflix. I do very little these days.
I must be lazy, so now I'm gonna be lazy.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I'm thinking of... Okay, so I guess now the question is, what do we do about it? I'm thinking of a scenario that's interesting. I'm going to disguise some details, but I have some friends who are in a relationship in the same industry. Mm-hmm. And one of them has apparently had somewhat more success, but not like leaps and bounds, or leaps and bounds. Let's say they're writers, right? And like they've both written novels, but one of the novels is like more successful, but it's not like a bestseller. Yeah. And so one of the partners cannot help but be incredibly envious when the more successful partner gets like new successes.
Oh, this is like a romantic relationship.
Romantic relationship.
Oh, wow, that's hard too. Yeah.
Yeah, so like let's say any opportunities for like book signings or media events, or agents or something like that. There's just it's like impossible for her to be happy for him.
Oof. It's kind of like Sex and the City.
I haven't seen it.
Have you not watched
I've seen like what? 5 episodes altogether. Yeah.
Oh my
and then
God.
one of the movies.
Okay, well we'll pretend it's that, but in Sex and the City, Carrie dates another writer, and he just is like consumed with envy. She's getting more and more successful, and he's like consumed with envy. So yeah, that's mine.
Yeah. So what's the solution to this? Because she knows, in my scenario, she wants to be happy for him, she knows this is destroying the relationship or damaging it, but it just feels so insurmountable.
Yeah. So the Leahy paper that I was checking out is really cool. Is applying cognitive behavioral techniques to envy, and it really worked on it really talks about how do you overcome the beliefs involved. There's a lot of different beliefs that kind of and maladaptive beliefs, like ones that are problematic, that underlie envy. And a lot of it is just like, what does it mean to be special? What does it mean to be powerful? Really, this kind of all or nothing thinking that a specific metric of power and success is the only thing that's valuable, and only, is the thing that makes you valuable as a person, and life is worthwhile. So, for example, some things that you could do as a therapist, or you could do for yourself, is to, one thing is to deconstruct status, to kind of break apart this idea that you might have as like this idealized version of status. You could think of, if you might think of like a hierarchy, of like, oh, this person's better because of this, I have more money, therefore I'm better. You can deconstruct it to be like, well, that's only one way of valuing someone. And you could really kind of break that apart to see how limiting that is. You could be like, well, yeah, there's money, but there's also like, look at all these other metrics of success. And also, what does it even mean? What does it even mean to be successful? Does it mean they're happier? Like, do we know that? Do we know that everyone with more money is happier? Is life all really about like one value? Right? What about the fact that, the bachelor world, academia, and other kinds of hierarchies are just separate cliques, right?
Yeah.
And it actually doesn't really, it's arbitrary. There's no universal good. It's like these different bubbles of people that just made one metric better than the other. So it kind of makes it kind of like you could highlight the arbitrary, if let's say your writer friend is getting like a lot of, or her partner is getting a lot of attention with books, it's like, well, that's just one way to look at success, right? And like, let's focus on your ways of also getting success, or at least not just success, but like value.
Yeah.
So that's one. What do you think about that?
I think it's totally true. It's just, I also think I think we know things intellectually that we can't feel.
Yeah.
So I would assume there's got to be some sort of behavior change here.
Yeah, and it gets tricky because if you do like just the pure going through thoughts and being like, you also have great things, people might know that, but it also might actually just still reinforce the idea that, they're comparing yourself and finding ways that you have success and power over other people might be bad, right? It might be like relieving, right? Like,
Yeah.
Every time you've said to me, like, oh, I feel like envious of someone else because of XYZ, my go-to as a friend is like, well, but you have all these things. And you're better in this way, which
But that reinforces the process of envy.
Exactly. It reinforces, it makes you feel better, and I hope, like, if it makes you feel better at the time, but it does reinforce the idea that, like, value is based on metrics, right?
Yeah.
And you're winning in other areas, but
Right.
if you really deconstruct it, you really like break that apart, and like all of these things don't actually matter. Everyone is valuable for their uniqueness, and we're all one, and these things are totally arbitrary. And so yeah, this is just going in through the thoughts, and we could talk about behaviors in a second, but
Yeah.
Another tip that a therapist or you can do for your loved one is to it's really broadening your perspective outside of that metric, right? If you're like, oh, I don't have as many followers, or your friend's like, oh, I don't have as many like book deals, you can consider all the things you could do even when you don't have a high status. Like, what does it actually get you? What is this more book deals, more followers, like, what does that actually afford you? Are there anything else in life that you can have besides for that? Can you get, like, think about your romantic love, think about the wonderful things you have in your life from your family and friends that power and success doesn't actually touch, right? A cute little technique they talk about is called the life space pie.
Okay.
So you make a pie, you draw this out like a circle, and you make different slices based on like what's important to that person, right? And so you like slice up that circle to like all the things in your life that have meaning, and label those as pieces of your life portfolio. And you could kind of, sometimes that just simple visual is enough to show that, that one metric of success is just one slice of pie. Like your number of followers, like your friend's book deals is just like one tiny slice, but then there's like a whole bunch that are like love for my fiance, love of my pets, like my time with my friends, my travel, adventure, right? So really helping the person broaden out their fixation on, his is how I rank on this metric, right?
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah.
It seems like overall there's this sense of like, look, you're choosing to be in a race that you don't have to be in. So can you step off the track?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and there's all these like kind of CBT techniques to notice and deal with the dysfunctional beliefs that may fuel envy, which is like when in CBT, for people who don't know, like when people have certain beliefs, they can really not reflect this situation and really lead to a lot of intense emotion. Like one type of dysfunctional belief is like dichotomous thinking, right? It's like black and white. You either win or you lose, right? You're either good or bad. And so there's all these different kinds of thoughts that can lead to envy, and it really like a CBT would be about like really noticing them and then really thinking through them. Like there's like a whole list of them. There's a couple ones that I tend to fall into a lot. Like one assumption is like, if they succeed, it means that you failed. And then you might want to think through that. It's like, is that true? Like, is that actually representative of the whole reality of it? You know, you could also think about like, if someone succeeded, that means they just achieved something in the moment. That doesn't mean I can't either.
Yeah.
Right? That doesn't take away from my successes. And also like, sometimes I win, sometimes you win, right? It's like, it doesn't have to be this absolute like sign of failure, which is one that I tend to, think.
Yeah. One thinking trap I realized I was getting into at the time was, it was like I was treating my life as though The Bachelor was the last great surprise or the last great opportunity. And when I could say, wait a minute, my life has been filled with opportunities and surprises and adventures. So it's not over yet. You know, at the time I was 27. It's like, okay, well, something awesome can still happen to me later on. You know, I can write that novel I've always written and then gain success that way. So it was like I was stuck in the present and then, you know, extrapolating that to be forever. When really it's like, okay, like these people are getting, you know, a greater, quote, success from this one opportunity, but it's not the last opportunity that will ever arise.
Yeah, I think the cognitive behavioral principle that you're talking about here, that's a really good example of like broadening out your thinking, right? Like envy and most emotions will narrow your attention to like one way of thinking. Oh, they have more followers, that's better than me. But then you broadening out and be like, wait a minute, I'm a full person, and that's like one small piece.
It's funny, like a little example is I always get envious when I hear that somebody else is going on like a really cool, like to another country. Like if somebody said I'm going to Africa, I'd be like, oh, I'm so jealous, but it's so stupid or I'm so envious, but it's so stupid because I could go to Africa next year and then I'll be the one in Africa. You know what I mean? So it's like you have to give life a chance and let it unfold before you. And
yeah, that's like the dysfunctional belief. If someone else has it, I can't have it, or it's a sign that I don't have it. But like, why? Right? That's a dysfunctional belief. Thoughts that are also attached to envy can be like, I need to impress others with my success and status, right? Like the idea that you
that
can
one's
only...
me.
I bring that up for a reason, right? It's like, sometimes when people grow up in certain kinds of families and environments where like one quality is really valued, it could make you believe that you could only be loved and have connection or have the things that you want if, let's say, you are the most beautiful, the most popular, the most rich, the most successful. And that, that could be broadened out to be like, well, you could also connect in other ways too. Is that really the thing that connects you to other people? You might get the admiration, but does it actually lead to love? I do see that might also be a huge issue when you have a family where there's like competition among siblings. I mean, we're talking about...
Are you serious?
You should know. Well, you tell me about that, because I grew up an only child and you grew up one of four, so...
Yeah. I mean, I grew up in a family where whenever my two oldest siblings would come home for Christmas, they would pull out their box of grade school awards and count them and compare them to each other. And then Andrew, my youngest but still older sibling, and I would just sit there with our like 2 trophies and be like, Yeah,
I saw the competition amongst my mom and her siblings too. I mean, I didn't I didn't experience that myself. Well, I actually did, now that I'm thinking about it, because I grew up as an only child, but then when my dad had my half-siblings, I felt very envious of his attention, so I kind of felt envy towards them, not in a way that I didn't want them to have love and affection and everything like that, but I was envious that we had the same dad, but they kind of had this a little bit more stable upbringing.
Yeah.
And I saw with my mom's siblings, my grandmother, she's wonderful in many ways, but didn't really pay attention to her kids equally. And so she would kind of have favorites and kind of focus on one quality or another and kind of, created kind of a sense of competition among my mom and her brother and sister. And I see that even to this day, I mean, they're like in their 60s, but they still feel envious of each other and kind of fighting for approval. So, we've been talking about how envy is, some bred in these kind of like achievement-oriented realms and professional realms, but it can also happen within a family.
Yeah, I mean, it's the story of my life. And I mean, it's odd because I don't remember my parents pitting us against each other very much. I think in part it came from my sister having a different dad and feeling maybe that similar kind of envy that you did of like, I'm the second daughter in the intact family. And there was just a lot of like, okay, well, I'm the smarter one. I'm the one who makes more money. And just a lot of those dynamics among the siblings.
And that feels icky because it's really hard to have that as a metric, right? Like I could be envious of my colleagues for academic success, but it's not like I wanted bad things for my brother and sister, or like I wasn't privileged in many ways or loved in many ways, but there is this kind of a sense of like looking at your siblings and being like, oh, I want to be better, or I want what they have, right?
Yeah.
Sibling rivalry.
So we talked a lot about kind of cognitive changes, how to kind of expand your mind around this. What can we do behaviorally?
A lot of the principles that we talked about before, I mean, whenever we say that there's an emotion that is going haywire, right, that's not healthy or adaptive and kind of getting in the way of our lives, so instead of helping. So for envy, if it's helping, it's motivating you, is helping you get status and power or happiness in ways that you feel like you value. But if it's creating a lot of anger, a lot of depression, a lot of anxiety, a lot of feeling down on yourself, basically it's to do the opposite action to what envy wants you to do. So really bad envy, it's a little bit more aggression, right? Like when someone is really driven by envy, it looks a little bit more like anger. So they might want to, someone who feels a lot of envy might want to destroy what another person has, undermine other people, right? Or kind of self-aggrandize yourself, like really boast and trying to build up this one achievement that you have in ways that are kind of demeaning or exploitative of other people. So the behaviors would just be the opposite of that, right? It would be to count your blessings, and I'm taking this from dialectical behavior therapy. Count your blessings, really like, this is also a cognitive strategy too, but make a list for yourself of all the things that you value in your life and things that you have, that's not about comparing with other people, but just like, what do you have that you feel blessed for, like kind of a gratitude practice. And then you might want to inhibit destroying other people's stuff, right? Like don't destroy other people's things,
or I think also, or destroying other people's happiness. Like,
yeah,
I think what can happen is somebody will be like, oh my god, I got a promotion, or oh my god, I have a new boyfriend, and there's a sense of like, you know, if you're not excited about it, or if you start picking out the flaws of the boyfriend or the job, you know, maybe don't do that.
Yeah, exactly. Don't do that, right? And maybe if you want to go all the way opposite, really boost up other people, right? Like go out of your way to compliment someone for their successes, share your resources, right? And, you know, compliment someone else's boyfriend and do something nice, right? Because the more you do those things, the more it kind of breaks the envy cycle. And also, you're probably then going to connect to others in these really lovely ways where you're probably projecting onto other people that other people are like happier or more successful or better than you. But everyone, you know, is insecure, and everyone can benefit from just like, you know, just having a friend compliment them or kind of build them up. And it actually fosters the same behavior in turn, right? It fosters this kind of collaboration. It's a competition feeling. Mm-hmm. So, you know, those are things that you can do, right? The people that you feel envious towards, go and actually do the opposite of what you want to do and like be, you know, envious and undermine them, but compliment them, give them something of yours, like help them out, right? To get more resources together.
I think one underlying principle of all this that we talk about frequently is like opposite action. It can be, the purpose can be to bring down the emotion, but the purpose can also be like, is envy taking you away from the person you want to be? Mm-hmm. Like, is it making you act in ways that you're not particularly proud of? Okay, mm-hmm. Well then how about, like, you know, I think people would rather be the person who is happy for their friends, who compliments their friends, who celebrates their friends, than the person who drags them down. And so this just brings you closer to being the person that you'd be proud of.
Right. Yeah. Or, you know, or compete well, right? Yeah. Like, if that's the person you want to be, if, you know, the times that I've looked at other people's accomplishments, I felt envious and, you know, went and did it myself, like went and tried to get those goals myself. Mm-hmm. I mean, it definitely fueled envy, but it definitely channeled it in a healthier way than me just kind of stewing in the like, why not me thoughts, you know? From DBT, they also recommend doing the opposite action to anger. So in terms of if you want to decrease the anger response to it, right? If you're like looking at your Instagram and getting super angry that someone is on vacation, right? Really adopt the opposite body chemistry and the body posture of someone who's angry. So if you're angry, you might clench your fist, you might furrow your brow, you might text all your friends horrible things about this person, right? For example. And then maybe do the opposite, like take a deep breath, relax, and open your hands, smile, take a walk, kind of calm your body down so you're not in a fight mode. Mm-hmm. Right, so you're not in this competitive stance, and you're a little bit more easy, because that also can foster empathy, can foster really pro-social thoughts of like, how can I collaborate and help this person? How can we both feel valuable? And that's not just about your number of followers, right? Mm-hmm. Like, how could I broaden my mind and relax and really think about all the amazing things that I have that are not just about that one success metric. So, yeah.
So I think that's it for envy. Kibby, do you want to close us out with some resources?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I haven't been able to find any super good books. So if anyone else has recommendations out there, we are totally open. Just write something to at Trumbolina on Instagram to Jacqueline. But we really like this paper, Cognitive Behavioral Therapy for Envy. It's published by Robert Leahy in 2021. We're going to link that on our website. I thought it was gave a really nice overview of like what envy is, who feels it, and how could it be problematic, and then we know what a therapist can do to fix it. So
awesome. Okay, well that's all from us. If you feel like envy towards our podcast for some reason, go ahead and do the opposite action of rating, reviewing, and subscribing. It would really help us out a ton.
And we do feel a lot of envy for podcasts who maybe are not as good, but have more followers and likes and subscribes. So why not just boost us up, you know? Fuel our envy.
Fuel our envy. Yes, that's our closing remark for today. Okay, guys, we will see you again soon. By accessing this podcast, I acknowledge that the hosts of this podcast make no warranty, guarantee, or representation as to the accuracy or sufficiency of the information featured in this podcast. The information, opinions, and recommendations presented in this podcast are for general information only, and any reliance on the information provided in this podcast is done at your own risk. This podcast and any and all content or services available on or through this podcast are provided for general, non-commercial informational purposes only and do not constitute the practice of medical or any other professional judgment, advice, diagnosis, or treatment, and should not be considered or used as a substitute for the independent professional judgment, advice, diagnosis, or treatment of a duly licensed and qualified healthcare provider. In case of a medical emergency, you should immediately call 911. The hosts do not endorse, approve, recommend, or certify any information, product, process, service, or organization presented or mentioned in this podcast, and information from this podcast should not be referenced in any way to imply such approval or endorsement.